Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive with us.
Always a pleasure.
So today, we're going to be looking at something that's a little bit different than what we normally cover.
Right.
You know, we usually are diving into some sort of a true crime case or story. But today we're going to be looking at something that really kind of hit close to home for a lot of people in the true crime community.
Definitely.
And that is this recent announcement from Crime Junkie about one of the hosts, Brit.
Yeah.
So we're going to be looking specifically at an audio clip that came directly from the Crime Junkie feed.
Okay.
Where the co-host shared this news. And we want to just kind of dive into what happened, what it means for the fans of the show, and kind of see where things go from here.
Makes sense.
So I think the best place to start is probably just to listen to the clip.
Yeah, let's hear it.
Okay, here we go.
Wow.
It's tough to hear her break down like that.
Yeah.
You know, I can't even imagine what Brit must be going through.
It's definitely a shock. You know, you listen to a podcast like Crime Junkie week after week, and they're covering these really, dark, heavy topics.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, it's like this very real, very personal thing.
It's like a glimpse behind the curtain.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, it humanizes the voices we hear every week.
It does. And it's interesting, too, because this wasn't a press release or some sort of carefully worded post on social media.
Right.
This was just, the co-host speaking directly to the fans.
Yeah.
And just, raw emotion.
Yeah.
So, I guess for anybody who maybe hasn't heard the news yet, or isn't quite caught up.
Yeah.
Brit had a brain bleed.
Oh, wow.
And a clot.
Oh, gosh.
And it sounds like she had to have multiple surgeries.
Oh, my goodness.
And, she's got a long road to recovery ahead of her.
Yeah. It's just scary to think about.
Yeah.
But I do think I thought it was really powerful how even through her tears, the co-host was still trying to reassure everybody that Brit was going to be okay.
Yeah.
And it just, shows how much she cares.
Yeah, you can just hear it in her voice.
Yes.
It wasn't just about, their friendship. It was about the fans.
Right.
Understanding how much the fans care about Brit and...
Yeah, and these aren't just, casual listeners either.
Yeah,
crime junkies,
Exactly.
They feel a real connection to these hosts.
They do.
And I don't know if you caught this part, but she mentioned that Brit had even joked with a nurse about watching Law and Order SVU.
Oh, really?
While she was in the hospital.
Oh, wow.
I mean, come on. That's just so Brit.
Yeah, classic Brit.
It's like, even in the face of something this serious...
Right.
Her sense of humor is still shining through.
It's amazing.
And I think that's what makes this whole situation so impactful.
Yeah.
It's not just a news story we're reading about.
Right.
This is somebody that, we feel like we have a connection to.
It is. And it's a good reminder of the power of podcasts, to create these really strong bonds between people who may never even meet in person.
It's true.
And I think it says a lot about the co-host, too.
What do you mean?
Well, she's going through something incredibly difficult right now.
Yeah.
And she's choosing to share it with the world. Mm-hmm. It makes you wonder, how do podcasters who build their platform on such a personal connection, how do they navigate these intensely private moments in such a public way?
It's a really good question.
And I think this whole situation raises even more questions about the future of the show.
Well, yeah, because the co-host did lay out kind of a plan, didn't she?
She did.
What was it again?
So basically, there are pre-recorded episodes featuring both hosts that'll air through May.
Okay.
So, listeners will still get their Crime Junkie fix.
Yeah.
And they'll still get to hear from Brit for at least a little while longer.
So that's good.
Yeah.
And then what happens?
So starting in June, it sounds like the co-host will be doing solo episodes.
Okay.
For at least a couple of months while Brit focuses on recovery.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
But it's going to be really interesting to see what that means for the show.
I know.
Will it change the tone?
Yep.
Will the content be different?
Yeah.
Will it impact that connection with the audience?
Oh, good questions.
Yeah. And one more thing I wanted to mention is that the co-host also made a point of asking fans to leave messages of support for Brit on the Crime Junkie Instagram page.
Yeah.
I thought that was really touching.
It was.
It just shows how much community matters in these situations.
Yeah.
And I think it really shows how much she values the listeners.
Absolutely.
She's basically saying we're all in this together.
Yeah.
It blurs the lines between, content creator and consumer.
It does.
And it turns this really personal experience into a shared one.
It really does. And I think that's a whole new level of fandom.
Yeah.
It's not just about listening to the podcast anymore.
Right.
It's about supporting the people behind the voices.
Yeah.
And being there for them in times of need.
Yeah, it's a really powerful thing.
It is. And it really makes you think, doesn't it? About the power of podcasting.
Yeah.
To create these bonds, between people who've never even met.
It's true.
And this whole thing with Brit and Crime Junkie.
Right.
It's not an isolated incident.
No, it's not.
We've seen this with other podcasts too.
Yeah.
Where hosts are dealing with personal stuff and they have to kind of figure out how to navigate that publicly.
Yeah.
So it raises some interesting questions.
Yeah, for sure.
About podcasting in general.
Yeah. What do you think are some of the biggest ones?
Well, for starters, as podcasting keeps getting more popular, we're seeing more and more of these personal stories kind of woven into the shows.
Yeah.
So it makes you wonder, where's the line between the personal and the professional?
Especially with something as intimate as a podcast.
Exactly.
It's like we're all kind of figuring it out as we go along. Yeah. Both as listeners and as creators.
Right.
It's like on the one hand, we want to be supportive
of course
when something like this happens.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, we don't want to intrude.
Right. It's a tough balance.
It is.
And I think this situation with Brit really highlights that.
How so?
Well, there's this thing called a parasocial relationship.
Okay.
That often develops between listeners and hosts.
I've heard of that.
Yeah. And basically it means, we feel like we know these people. Like they're our friends.
Right.
Even though the relationship is totally one-sided.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And it's not just with podcasts either.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
It happens with, celebrities, YouTubers, even fictional characters.
Right.
But I do think there's something about podcasts.
What is it?
It's like the intimacy of audio, the way we literally invite these voices into our ears.
Yeah.
I think that intensifies the connection somehow.
I agree. And when something happens, that disrupts that closeness.
Right. Like a host going through something difficult.
Yeah.
It can be really jarring.
Yeah, it is.
Because it forces us to confront the reality.
That they're real people.
Yep.
With real lives.
Exactly.
Outside of the podcast.
Right. And that can be hard to process.
It is, because let's face it, we often turn to podcasts.
Yeah.
For comfort, for escape. For sure. We want to be entertained, informed, maybe even distracted from our own lives.
Absolutely.
So when something like this happens, it's like, it kind of bursts that bubble.
It does. And I think that's why it was so commendable.
Yeah.
That the co-host chose to be so transparent. She could easily just gone silent.
Yeah.
Taking a break.
Right.
Nobody would have blamed her.
Yeah.
But instead, she shared this incredibly personal thing.
Yeah.
Knowing that it was going to be tough for a lot of people to hear.
It says a lot about her character.
It does.
And about Crime Junkie as a whole.
Yeah. They've always been about honesty and authenticity. Even vulnerability.
Right. And it's kind of acknowledging that life isn't always perfect.
Yeah.
Sometimes the stories that hit closest to home are the ones we least expect.
It's a good reminder that even when things are tough, there's strength in community.
There is.
The co-host's decision to share this.
Right.
It wasn't just about updating listeners.
It was about seeking support.
Exactly.
And offering a space for shared grief and hope.
Yeah, and that brings us back to her plea for messages for Brit. That's a powerful example of how podcasts can create this sense of collective care.
Yeah.
It turns passive listeners into active participants.
In Brit's healing journey.
Exactly.
And it makes you wonder,
Yeah.
What does this all mean for podcasting in general?
Right. What does it mean for other creators?
Yeah.
Will we see more of this kind of transparency and vulnerability moving forward?
That's the big question.
It is.
And I don't know if we have the answer yet.
I don't know either.
But I do think this whole situation has the potential to be a real turning point.
Yeah.
It forces us to really think about our expectations.
So sure.
You know, both as creators and as consumers.
Right.
Like, what is the role of a podcast host?
Yeah.
What are the boundaries of sharing personal information? And how do we as listeners respond with empathy and respect?
Such important questions.
They are.
And, you know, this is a complex issue.
For sure.
There's no easy answers.
No.
But I do think this has started a conversation that needed to happen.
Yeah, I agree.
And I'm really curious to see how it shapes podcasting going forward.
Me too. It'll be interesting to see how other podcasters handle these kinds of situations and whether listeners will continue to embrace this level of vulnerability.
One thing's for sure, though.
What's that?
Podcasting is not just about entertainment or information anymore.
Right.
It's about connection and community and the shared human experience.
It really is.
Yeah.
It really does feel like a shift.
Yeah.
And it's not a bad thing.
No, not at all. And, you know, while we've been talking about Brit and Crime Junkie,
yeah,
I do think there are some broader takeaways here.
For sure. Like what?
Well, for anybody who listens to podcasts, really, it makes you think about the assumptions we make.
About
the people behind the mics.
Right.
You know, we think we know them based on their voices, their stories, you know.
Their content.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But this is a good reminder.
That there's more to the story.
Exactly. You know, there's more to the person.
Than what we hear.
Yeah.
Right? And it's easy to forget that these are real people with real lives.
Yeah.
You know, outside of the podcast, they have families, relationships, struggles that we might not know anything about.
And I think that awareness is really important for having a healthy relationship.
With the creators.
Yeah. You know, between listeners and creators.
Yeah. As we wrap up this deep dive, I keep thinking about that part in the audio clip.
Oh, where she asks for the messages.
Yeah. You know, just leave a message of support for Brit.
Yeah.
Such a simple gesture.
It was.
But it felt so powerful.
It did. It was a real call to action.
Yeah.
And it speaks to the, you know, the power of podcasting.
To connect people.
Yeah, to create this space for empathy and support.
Absolutely. It was almost like she was saying, you know, I'm hurting, my friend's hurting.
Right.
But we're not alone.
We're in this together.
Yeah. And she invited everyone into that.
Into the healing process.
Yeah.
And I have no doubt that those messages will mean the world to Brit.
Oh, yeah.
As she recovers.
It's amazing how podcasting can do that.
I know. It's really incredible.
So as we leave this conversation, what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from all of this?
You know, I'd say just a renewed appreciation for the human element.
Of podcasting.
Yeah. You know, remember that behind every voice, every story, every episode, there are real people.
With real lives.
Yeah. Joys and sorrows.
Right. And sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones that remind us of that.
Of our shared humanity and our capacity for empathy.
Well said.
Thank you.
And to Brit, we're sending all our best wishes for a full recovery.
Absolutely. Here's to brighter days ahead.
Absolutely. Until next time, everybody keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.